Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that the very thing you're waiting for is already on its way? Yes, the breakthrough, the miracle, the promise that God has for you is coming, but it may not come when you expect. The question is, are you willing to wait for it? Are you willing to trust that God's timing is not only perfect, but necessary for your ultimate success? Today, I want to challenge you to stir something deep within your spirit, because the greatest blessings in your life won't come at the speed of your plans. They will come at the pace of God's perfect will. I know it's difficult. I know the frustration builds and doubt creeps in. You see everyone else moving forward, but you're stuck in a season of waiting. But what if I told you that this moment of stillness is preparing you for what's next? Stick with me through this message, because I believe that by the end, you'll walk away with a new perspective on patience and a newfound trust in God's timing that will change everything. God's timing is often in direct contrast to our own. We live in a world where everything moves at an increasingly fast pace, driven by technology, instant communication, and immediate gratification. From fast food to 24/7 shopping, we are accustomed to getting what we want when we want it. This desire for instant results is seeped into all areas of life, including our spiritual journey. However, when it comes to God's plan for us, His timing operates on a much different scale than our own. The key to understanding God's timing is realizing that He is not bound by the same constraints that we are. As humans, we see time in linear terms, past, present, and future. We make plans based on our understanding of what needs to be done when it needs to be done. We expect things to unfold in a predictable sequence. But God, in His infinite wisdom, operates outside of our linear understanding of time. He is eternal, and He knows what is best for us at every moment, even when it doesn't align with our immediate desires. One of the key challenges we face when trusting in God's timing is the frustration that arises from the waiting period. When we feel that something is supposed to happen, or we believe we are for a breakthrough, the lack of immediate results can be discouraging. We question whether God is listening, whether He is even aware of our struggles. But waiting does not mean God is absent. It simply means that He is working in ways we cannot always see. The Bible teaches that God's ways are higher than ours, and His understanding is far greater, Isaiah 55:9. This means that when God delays, it is not out of indifference, it is out of a profound love and wisdom that we may not fully grasp in the moment. Think about the story of Abraham and Sarah. They were promised a child by God, but their wait was so long that they took matters into their own hands, resulting in a situation that was far from ideal. Sarah's impatience led her to encourage Abraham to have a child with her maidservant, Hagar. However, the child born of that union was not the fulfillment of God's promise. It wasn't until many years later that Sarah, at an advanced age, finally bore the child God had promised Isaac. Through this story, we learn that even when we take things into our own hands in the face of waiting, God's plan will not be thwarted. His timing will still prevail, and His promises will come to fruition, but on His terms. Another profound example is the life of Joseph. From his betrayal by his brothers to his rise in Egypt, Joseph's journey was filled with moments of intense suffering and long periods of waiting. His dreams of greatness appeared to be delayed, and it seemed as if everything was working against him. Yet God was using every moment, every trial, to prepare Joseph for his ultimate destiny. In the end, Joseph's timing and God's timing aligned perfectly, and he was able to save not only his family, but many others during a time of famine. Genesis 41. Joseph's story teaches us that even in our deepest moments of despair, God is orchestrating events for His purposes, and His timing will unfold in ways we cannot yet understand. The difference between our timing and God's timing is not just about how fast or slow things happen, it's about purpose. God's timing is never random or arbitrary. Every moment of waiting is preparing us for something greater. Whether it is strengthening our faith, developing our character, or teaching us to trust, the waiting period is a crucial part of God's divine plan. When we embrace His timing, we position ourselves to receive not just what we want, but what we truly need according to His greater purpose for our lives. It is important to remember that patience is not about passively waiting, but about actively trusting that God is at work even when we cannot see it. Psalms 27:14 encourages us to wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. This verse reminds us that wait involves strength, courage, and trust. It is a dynamic process that refines our character and shapes our faith. While the world urges us to act quickly and push for immediate results, God invites us to rest in His perfect timing, knowing that He is always working behind the scenes to bring about His good and perfect will. God's timing is a reminder that we are not in control of the universe, but He is. And in His hands, we can rest assured that everything is being worked out for our good and His glory, Romans 8:28. Waiting is simply a matter of passing time. It is a transformative process that shapes us into the people we are meant to be. Many times we view waiting as a period of inactivity where nothing significant happens. We feel stuck, restless, or frustrated, thinking that we are not moving forward. But waiting, when seen through a spiritual lens, is anything but passive. It is an active season in which God works on our hearts, prepares us for the next stage of our lives, and refines us to handle what's ahead. Think of the way a seed grows. The process begins underground, out of sight, where it appears that nothing is happening. The seed is buried in soil, seemingly dormant, but beneath the surface, the seed is undergoing significant change. It is breaking open, sprouting roots, and preparing to grow into something far greater. This process takes time, and during this time, it seems as if nothing is happening. But in reality, a tremendous transformation is occurring. The same is true for us during times of waiting. While we may not see the immediate effects of our waiting, God is quietly preparing things we cannot fully comprehend. The Bible speaks often of waiting, and many of its heroes of faith had to endure long periods of waiting before their promises were fulfilled. The prophet Isaiah captures this well when he says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint," Isaiah 40:31. This verse highlights the idea that while waiting can be exhausting, it also strengthens us. Just like an athlete trains to build muscle, waiting builds spiritual strength. When we learn to wait on God, we gain the endurance to face challenges that would otherwise overwhelm us. Waiting can also teach us patience and perseverance, two qualities that are essential for any believer. James 5:7-8 encourages us to be patient, then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. The farmer knows that without the right timing, there can be no harvest. He waits for the right seasons to bring the fruit, and during this time, he trusts that what he has planted is growing. Similarly, in our own lives, we plant seeds of faith, trust, and obedience, knowing that we must wait for the right time to see the fruit of our labor. We must trust the process and trust that God is working even when we cannot see immediate results. Waiting also cultivates humility. In our fast-paced world, we often want things now and are not accustomed to the patience that waiting requires. Yet God uses waiting to teach us that we are not in control of everything. He's the one who holds the times and seasons in his hands, Ecclesiastes 3:1. When we wait, we acknowledge our dependence on Him. We surrender our control and allow God to lead us in His perfect timing. This process of surrender can be uncomfortable, but it brings us closer to God and deepens our trust in Him. In addition to developing patience and humility, waiting can help us refocus our hearts and minds. Often we become so focused on the goal or the end result that we forget to appreciate the journey. When we are forced to wait, we are given the opportunity to pause, reflect, and listen. During these moments, God may speak to us in ways that would be missed if we were rushing through life. Jesus reminds us in Matthew 11:28-30 to come to Him when we are weary and burdened, promising that He will give us rest. In moments of waiting, we are invited to draw closer to Him, to find peace in His presence, and to renew our focus on the things that truly matter. Finally, waiting teaches us to let go of our own agendas and submit to God's perfect plan. It is easy to try to rush through life, to push for things to happen on our terms. But God's plan is always better than our own. He sees the big picture while we are often focused only on the immediate. In moments of waiting, we learn to trust that God is not withholding from us, but rather preparing us for something greater. As Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Waiting is a powerful way of submitting our plans to God and allowing his perfect will to unfold in our lives. When we embrace the process of waiting, we realize that it is not wasted time. It is a time of preparation, growth, and deepening our relationship with God. The lessons we learn in the waiting are often the ones that shape us the most and equip us to handle the blessings and challenges that lie ahead. So while waiting may feel difficult, it is never in vain. It is a crucial part of the journey, one that leads to greater strength, wisdom, and alignment with God's perfect timing. Patience is often seen as the key test of faith. When faced with waiting, doubt and frustration can creep in, making it hard to trust in God's plan. It's easy to believe in God's ability to do great things, but it's much harder to trust that he will do them in his time. Patience in the face of delay reveals the depth of our faith and the extent to which we trust that God is in control. The Bible is full of stories where God's timing tested the faith of his people. Take the example of Job, whose faith was tested through immense suffering. Job's patience in the midst of his trials demonstrated deep, unwavering trust in God. Despite losing everything, Job's faith never wavered. He questioned, he grieved, but he did not forsake God. His story reminds us that patience is not about passive waiting, but about actively trusting that God's plans, even when shrouded in mystery, are still for our good. James 5:11 says, "As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered." Job's perseverance through suffering showed the kind of patient faith that God honors. Similarly, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul talks about the endurance of faith. In Romans 5:3-4, he writes, "We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." Patience doesn't just stand still, it builds within us the character needed to endure trials. Our ability to wait with faith, knowing that God is at work, shapes us into more faithful and hopeful followers of Christ. Patience, as a test of faith, pushes us to go beyond our comfort zones and lean deeper into God's trustworthiness. When we speak of God's timing, we must remember that it is always woven into a much larger divine plan, one that transcends our limited understanding. While we may look at our lives and see pieces scattered across time, God sees the grand tapestry being woven together with every event, every circumstance, and every season of waiting. His plan is much more intricate and far-reaching than we can perceive, and the timing of events in our lives is part of that larger, perfect plan. The key to understanding this concept is recognizing that God's timing is not just about aligning events with our personal desires or goals, but about fulfilling a greater purpose. We may feel that a particular desire is urgent or that something should happen right now, but God's perspective is far wider. He does not just work in the present moment, he works with an eternal perspective. He knows the exact timing for each event, the perfect moment when everything will fall into place. For example, consider the story of Esther. God's timing was evident throughout her story, where at just the right moment, Esther was placed in a position of power to save the Jewish people. It wasn't an accident or a random twist of fate. God's hand was orchestrating her life to fulfill a specific purpose. In the same way, God uses our circumstances, even our delays, to position us for the greater works he has in store. Our waiting seasons may seem like delays or detours, but they are actually part of God's process of positioning us. He may be preparing us spiritually, emotionally, and even physically for something greater than what we could have anticipated. Think about the journey of the Israelites in the wilderness. God led them through the desert, not because he had forgotten his promise to bring them to the promised land, but because he was preparing them for what was ahead. In the wilderness, they learned obedience, trust, and dependence on him. It was a time of preparation, not just a delay. God was molding them into the people they needed to be for the land he had promised. In the same way, when we are waiting for something, whether it be a relationship, a job, or a breakthrough in our circumstances, it's easy to view it as wasted time or frustration. However, it's vital to remember that God's timing works behind the scenes to align everything perfectly for the moment when we are ready to receive it. This is not to say that waiting is always easy. It's often filled with doubts, struggles, and fears. We may wonder if our prayers are being heard or if our dreams are truly on God's heart. But even in those moments, we are reminded through Scripture that God is always at work. In Psalm 37:23, it says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way." This means that even in the times when we can't see progress, God is moving and directing us in ways that are preparing us for what he has planned. This understanding of God's timing allows us to rest in his plan, knowing that he is not distant or inactive while we wait. Rather, he is active in our lives, guiding us step by step. It's also important to recognize that sometimes our own expectations of how things should unfold can limit the way we see God's plan. Our impatience and desire for quick results can cause us to overlook the deeper work he is doing inside us. While we might want something right now, God may be waiting for us to grow, to develop the patience, wisdom, or strength needed to steward the blessing or responsibility that lies ahead. Take the example of King David once again. He was anointed as a young man to be the king of Israel, but he didn't ascend to the throne immediately. David spent years in the wilderness, facing challenges and overcoming enemies. He was not just waiting to be crowned king, he was being prepared for the weight of leadership. God knew that the throne would require humility, courage, and integrity, and David's time in waiting shaped him into the king he was called to be. The process of God's timing involves patience, not just in waiting for external circumstances to change, but in allowing him to shape us from the inside out. Every delay, every moment of waiting is an opportunity for growth and for our faith to be strengthened. When we trust that God's plan is greater than our own, and that his timing is perfect, we are able to rest in the assurance that everything is unfolding as it should. In the Gospel of John, we read about Jesus' interaction with Mary and Martha after the death of their brother Lazarus. They had sent for Jesus, hoping he would come and heal Lazarus, but he didn't arrive in time and Lazarus died. However, Jesus had a larger plan in mind. He didn't just want to heal Lazarus, he wanted to reveal his power over death and to strengthen the faith of those who were watching. His timing, though it appeared delayed, was for a purpose far greater than simply answering a prayer for healing. Jesus used this moment to demonstrate that he is the resurrection and the life, and to glorify God in a way that could not have happened without the delay, John 11:4. This story serves as a powerful reminder that God's timing isn't just about meeting our needs when we expect. It is about glorifying him in ways that go beyond our immediate desires and expectations. In every delay and every waiting season, God is working out his plan to bring about something far greater than we can imagine. The waiting is not a setback, it is a setup for something significant. God's timing is not just about meeting our needs, it's about fulfilling a purpose that extends beyond our own lives. He is at work in ways we may not understand, but we can trust that his timing will always be perfect for the greater good. God's timing is often much slower than we expect, but the process of waiting shapes our character and strengthens our faith in ways we may not fully recognize. Patience is not simply about enduring a period of waiting, but about learning to trust and depend on God even when things aren't happening according to our desired schedule. This slow process of growth can sometimes feel frustrating, but it is precisely in those moments that God is preparing us for something greater, something beyond our immediate vision. The challenge is to resist the temptation to rush through the waiting periods of our lives, instead embracing the lessons that come with them. One of the most important lessons we learn through waiting is the cultivation of perseverance. The Apostle James teaches in James 1:2-4 that we should consider it pure joy when we face trials because they produce perseverance, which leads to spiritual maturity. This is because waiting forces us to confront our impatience and demands that we trust in something beyond our own efforts. We often want things to happen quickly, but in the quiet moments of waiting, God refines us, teaching us to rely on His strength rather than our own. Waiting becomes an opportunity for growth, for learning how to lean on God when our own abilities or resources fall short. There are countless biblical examples of individuals who had to wait for God's timing before receiving the blessings He had in store for them. One of the most notable examples is the life of Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, yet Abraham had to wait years before the birth of his promised son, Isaac. The waiting period was filled with challenges and doubts, and Abraham at times tried to take matters into his own hands, such as when he fathered a child with Hagar, thinking that perhaps this was the fulfillment of God's promise. But it wasn't until Abraham fully surrendered his will and trusted God's timing that Isaac was born. God's promise came not in Abraham's time, but in God's time, and the blessing was far greater than Abraham could have anticipated. In these moments of waiting, we learn to practice trust. Trust is not simply about believing that God will come through for us. It is about believing that God's way and His timing are better than our own. Our culture often values quick results, instant gratification, and immediate success. But in God's kingdom, patience is a virtue, and timing is part of His perfect plan. Psalm 27:14 reminds us to wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. This verse highlights that waiting is not passive, it is active, and it involves building strength and courage as we wait. Our faith is tested in the waiting, and when we choose to trust God instead of rushing ahead or giving up, our spiritual foundation becomes stronger. Waiting also teaches us about God's faithfulness. Each time we experience a delay, we are reminded that God has always been faithful in the past and will continue to be faithful in the future. This is particularly evident in the life of the Israelites as they wandered in the desert after leaving Egypt. Despite their complaints and doubts, God provided for them in ways that demonstrated His faithfulness, such as providing manna from heaven and water from a rock. Through these miraculous provisions, God showed that He was present and would not leave them even during the long, difficult years of waiting. As believers, when we look back on our own lives, we see how God has been faithful to us, and this strengthens our confidence in His future promises. The story of Jesus' arrival on earth is also an example of God's timing. The Israelites had long awaited the coming of the Messiah, but the arrival of Jesus came at a time that seemed unexpected. The political and social conditions of the time were harsh, and many believed that the Messiah would come to free them from Roman oppression. Yet Jesus' ministry was not focused on political freedom, but on spiritual liberation. His timing in coming to earth was perfect for the fulfillment of God's larger purpose for humanity. He came at a time when the world was ripe for His message of grace, salvation, and redemption. God's timing may not always align with our expectations, but we can trust that His timing serves a far greater purpose than our limited understanding. God's timing is always perfect, and while it may feel slow at times, it is working in our favor, shaping us into the people He wants us to become. Waiting is not just a passive experience, it is an opportunity for deep spiritual growth. It is in the waiting that our faith is refined, our character strengthened, and our trust in God deepened. By choosing to trust God's perfect timing, we learn that His plans are far better than anything we could have imagined or orchestrated ourselves. The blessings that come from waiting are not just external, they are internal as we grow in patience, trust, and faith, becoming more aligned with God's will for our lives. We should remember that when we wait on God, we are not just waiting for things to change, we are waiting for God's best to unfold in our lives. Whether it's a waiting season for a job, a relationship, or a breakthrough in a challenging situation, God's timing and His plan are always worth the wait. Trusting God's timing means surrendering our own desires for immediate results and recognizing that His plan for our lives is always better than anything we could orchestrate ourselves. It is easy to get caught up in the pressures of life and the temptation to push for what we want right now. But God invites us into a deeper relationship with Him, one that requires us to trust His timing and His ways. The struggle often comes when we cannot see the end result and don't understand why we must wait. But God is not only working in the external circumstances, He is also working in our hearts and lives, refining us for what is ahead. In times of waiting, we may feel tempted to question whether God has forgotten us or whether we are being overlooked. However, it is essential to remember that God sees the full picture. His plans for us are not just about the outcomes we desire, but about the transformation that occurs in us as we wait. God's ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are higher than ours. Isaiah 55:8-9. While we might feel that we have been left in a holding pattern, God is actively preparing us for something far greater than we could anticipate. We may not understand why things are delayed or why certain doors haven't opened yet, but we can trust that He is guiding us through the process and leading us to exactly where He wants us to be. Consider the example of Joseph. Joseph had a dream as a young man that he would one day rise to a position of great authority, and his brothers would bow to him. However, instead of seeing this promise fulfilled immediately, Joseph went through years of betrayal, imprisonment, and hardship. It seemed like the complete opposite of what he had envisioned for his life. But during those years, God was working on Joseph's character and preparing him for the responsibility that would come with his dreams being fulfilled. When the time was right, Joseph was elevated to a position of leadership, and his brothers did indeed bow before him, but it was all in God's timing. God had a greater plan that went beyond Joseph's immediate desires. His waiting period was not wasted. It was a process of preparation and purification. In the same way, our waiting seasons may seem confusing and difficult, but they are not wasted. God uses these times to develop patience, humility, and dependence on Him. When we choose to trust in God's timing, we are choosing to let go of our control and place our trust fully in His hands. This is not always easy, especially when the world around us pushes for instant results. However, patience is a fruit of the Spirit and is cultivated in the waiting. Galatians 5:22-23 tells us that the fruit of the Spirit includes patience, and it is through the challenges of life that this fruit grows. When we rely on God's timing, we are also embracing His perfect will for our lives. It is easy to get caught up in the desire to accomplish things in our own way and in our own time, but God has a unique plan for each of us. His timing may not always match our expectations, but it is always perfect. Psalm 31:15 declares, "My times are in your hands," acknowledging that God is in control of every moment. When we surrender our timeline to God, we acknowledge that He knows what is best for us, and His plans for us are always good, even when they involve waiting. Furthermore, trusting in God's timing strengthens our faith. Every time we wait on God, we are reminded that He is faithful. His word tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5:24, "The one who calls you is faithful, and He will do it." God's faithfulness is not dependent on our circumstances or our timing, but on His character. His promises are sure, and He is always working for our good, even when we don't see the immediate results. Each time we wait with trust, we are reminded of God's goodness and learn to rely on Him more fully. It is important to remember that while waiting may seem like a time of inactivity, it is often a time of great activity in the spiritual realm. God is working even when we cannot see it. There are moments when it feels like nothing is happening, but in those times, God is working in ways that are invisible to us. We are being refined, prepared, and strengthened, all of which are necessary for the blessing that will come when the time is right. Just like a farmer waits patiently for his crops to grow, we must wait with the knowledge that God's timing is perfect, and that what He has promised will come to fruition. In addition to strengthening our faith, trusting in God's timing helps us develop a deeper intimacy with Him. Waiting forces us to rely on God in a way that we often don't when things are going smoothly. It draws us into a place of deeper prayer, dependence, and surrender. Psalm 62:5 says, "Yes, my soul find rest in God, my hope comes from him." When we learn to wait on God and trust his timing, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. The more we trust in his timing, the more we can rest in the assurance that he is working for our good. God's timing is not just about receiving blessings or answers to our prayers. It is about growing in our relationship with him, developing a deeper trust in his plans, and allowing him to shape us into the people he has created us to be. As we wait on his perfect timing, we learn to surrender our will to his, knowing that he is leading us to something far greater than we could have imagined on our own. The waiting may be difficult, but the rewards of trusting God's timing are immeasurable.